Take the fear out of your decision making and don't live by thinking what others might think of you, being judged by others. It doesn't matter. As people who've entered an organization, unfortunately to a certain extent, you do have to play a political game for a while. I'm German speaking, and I'm also a lawyer. And I tend to be quite blunt. And I've had to soften that. One of my coaches said I had to wear more pink. And I don't even do pink. I don't see pink as a color.
Marleen Potgieter is an attorney with over 20 years of commercial experience. Beyond her legal work, Marleen is an expert in leadership, bullying and harassment, conflict resolution and executive coaching. Today, we dive into Marleen's journey and her advice for young people navigating workplace dynamics and professional relationships.
Marleen, welcome to the Adulting Co podcast. It's wonderful to have you here.
Thank you, Dylan. And might I just say, I think this is such an amazing idea. And what you're doing is really awesome. So well done to you. Kudos to you. I've been listening with great interest to some of your podcasts.
Thank you. Thank you so much. So Marleen, I want to dive straight into it. When you look back on your career, you kind of began as a commercial lawyer. And then to fast forward to where you are today, working as a consultant, working for yourself. How did those early years shape you into who you are today?
So it's interesting. I don't think that I'm well suited to law as a career, which I took a long and circuitous route to find out. But I've never regretted the study of law, because the study of law, first of all, it's interesting, especially when it comes to our rights. But it sets you up in a very unique way to be able to problem solve. So when a client comes into your office, you don't know what they're going to tell you. And you're not sitting there with like a fat book that has all the answers to everything that a client is ever going to tell you. So what law does to you, and looking back, professors who teach you law make you kind of do this, is problem solve. So you learn problem solving. You learn a set of rules and what the law stands for. And what you then have to do is take what the client has told you and apply it to those sets of rules, to what the law says. And that's just basic problem solving. And it's taught me over the years to hone down on the issue. I know all my friends who are lawyers are incredibly impatient around discussions where people waffle, because we've seen, the answer a long time before many other people do, because it really does pinpoint what is the crux of the issue. And then secondly, being able to problem solve sort of a random set of facts to a body of knowledge that you have.
Okay, those are really valuable skills, I think, for everyone ultimately. And Marleen, what you knew obviously from early on that it wasn't 100% what you wanted to do. Then what kind of drove you to leave the comfort of the stability of employment to go and work on your own as a consultant?
Yeah, interesting your choice of words, because it wasn't something that the decision wasn't made overnight, and I really thought about it very carefully. So you reach the top of the heap. You've done exactly what you always wanted to do. You've become a partner at a law firm with the expense account that comes with it and the credit card. Thank you very much. And then you go, oh, I'm setting off on my own here. That's really scary. So I would literally wake up for almost a week and go, no, I'm not going to do it. And then the next day go, no, but I have to do it. I'll never forgive myself if I don't take this opportunity. And I think that's what ultimately made me take that final leap, is that question of, if I don't do it now, then when am I going to do it? And will I look back on my life and go, oh my gosh, I should have done it, when I got the opportunity, and I didn't. So yeah, it wasn't an easy choice. And ultimately, you really need to think about why you're doing it, what the reasons are behind it, and grasping at opportunities when they come your way.
And I want to maybe to go a bit deep into that. You've obviously taken many opportunities in your life, like by the horns. And what have been the some of the kind of habits or practices which you've built up throughout your career, which has enabled you to be so successful. Yeah, whether it's daily or weekly or just things that you've learned how to do.
Okay. Thank you, Dylan. I'm glad that from your perspective, you think I'm successful. I'll take that. Thank you so much. First of all, I think my work ethic. I show up. And when you speak to authors, when they sit in front of an empty journal and they have to start writing, most authors will tell you there's not a muse that comes flying past and, introduces the topic for you. You literally have to show up. So I have a very strong work ethic, and I also work from home. So that stood me in really good stead. There is a certain block of time where I just sit down and show up and do my work. The other flip side to that is when I close my door, I literally forget what's in there. If I weren't able to do that, if I weren't able to shut off, I would carry, because sometimes you're given information from clients that are really worrisome, that could keep you up at night. And if you lie awake at night worrying about the stuff, then what is the client doing? How are you going to solve those problems? So I have taught myself to shut off completely. And I'm very jealous about my time off. I take my time off. I do it very religiously. I close that door and I literally forget what's behind the door until I open it again. So I think those are the two things. But on a more macro level, what allowed me ultimately to make that leap is to be absolutely clear on who I am, what my values are, what my purpose is. I think my purpose got shown to me at my law firm. The managing partner said to me, please stop educating your clients. You're putting yourself out of business. But it was in line with, I was teaching clients what the law said, which kind of is counterproductive if you're a litigation attorney and you're trying to, get people out of trouble when things go wrong. But my core value is imparting knowledge. So taking the leap in line with that core value was ultimately the right step for me, and ultimately easy if you know what that value is early on. So if I could give any advice to anyone who's starting out, is craft that for yourself. Ask what your purpose is. Ask what your values are. What do you stand for? Who am I when I show up? Who do I want to be? It makes the decision-making that much easier. If your decision-making is incongruent with who you are and what you really stand for, you'll feel it in your life. But if it is in line with who you are and what you stand for and what your purpose is, then it makes that decision so much easier.
And Marleen, in keeping with the idea of knowing yourself and understanding who you are, what's been your kind of secret sauce? What's been the thing which you think has really brought you that success in terms of your greatest strength, I guess?
Yeah, that's an interesting question, Dylan. And in a way, I'd really have to think about that. But because a lot of my work is about people's rights, I have very strong views on the rule of law, what is right, what is wrong. And I don't consider myself in life a brave person. For instance, I can't do downhill mountain biking. But I'm extremely strong on what is right and wrong. And in that sense, I think I'm quite brave. I will stand up to anyone if I think what is happening is wrong. And I have before. And sometimes in retrospect go, whoa, where did that come from? And then start shaking after I've done it. But at the time, I think what drives me is this like very strong feeling of what is right and wrong from within my body of knowledge. I'm not talking about moral values or anything, just my chosen field and what I think is right and wrong within my body of knowledge. I feel very strongly about that. And I think perhaps that is it. I'd have to think about that a little bit, but that's what immediately came to mind when you asked me that question.
And I think, Marleen, also, I mean, we've obviously known each other for many years, and what I've learned from you also is to be so strong in or know, first of all, who you are and what you stand for, and then the strength almost comes naturally when you've got that internal compass very clear. And I found that even in this process of starting Adulting Co, it's not easy to start a business, and you have to put yourself out there. There's an element of vulnerability that comes with it, particularly when you're posting on social media, for example. But if you are clear in who you are and what it is that you stand for, and this is aligned with the values, with my own values, then you can withstand all criticisms and all other things that come your way, because it's clear. And yeah, I
Yeah.
want to also just acknowledge you for that learning over the years as well.
Yeah. Thank you, Dylan. I really appreciate that. When you set out, and I'm, referring to the jump that you've taken and how brave that is and the courage that it takes, is we are often fear driven, and we are driven by how we might be perceived by others. So we don't take that step because we're crippled with fear, and then we put up all kinds of skittles that prevent us from taking that step and taking that leap. And and if you come to the conclusion that nobody cares, nobody nobody really cares, and it's about you, it's about what you want to do and where you want to go and what your purpose is, um, and regardless of what other people might think, when you understand that that is the core of what you stand for, it literally takes the fear out of it. Then it doesn't matter what other people think. Then all that matters is whether you are aligned with that and whether you are disappointing yourself or not. It makes the decision making a lot easier. Now, this is not something that I came to in my 20s. And if I were to give advice to anyone who's just setting out, it's literally that: take the fear out of the decision making, and don't live by thinking what others might think of you, being judged by others. It doesn't matter. What matters is what is true for you and what is important for you.
That's such a beautiful point, Marlene. And I think, having worked with a lot of Gen Zs and people in their early 20s, I think there's often a lot of pressure which has been brought about by growing up in the era of social media, for example, and the constant comparison that can come up. And I think it's also it's amazing to hear someone who is at a later stage in their career reflecting back and just providing that perspective, because I think it's also quite easy for when someone is in their early 20s to think that, oh, things are not working for me, or I'm not yet clear, and things are over, or it's like a disaster. But again, having someone to be able to reflect back at that stage and later stage of their career on all the kind of turmoil that one goes through, and ability to keep your center through all of that is really powerful.
It is something that's worrying about Gen Z at the moment, and the level of anxiety that faces our society at the moment. And it literally is that comparison that we make with others. And just to say right up front, you think that person is driving a sleek car, don't think that it's not being funded by the bank. Don't think for 1 minute that that person outright owns that vehicle. So stacking up to what we see on social media is a massive big thing at the moment. But we have to be careful, because that's how people portray themselves. It's probably not the real story, which is why it's so important to start with yourself and ask yourself, within myself, am I true to me? And is this right with what I stand for? And then also to kind of select 2 or 3 people whose opinions really matter. Not the world, not social media out there, not all your friends on your social media pages, but the 2 or 3 people whose opinions in your life really matter. That if you were to go to them and ask honestly for their opinion, that they would give that opinion and feedback honestly without breaking you down, and not trying to stack yourself up to the masses out there that are your followers, like on social media, because that's not a true picture.
Yeah, 100%. And Marlene, very much related to this, you obviously have trained a lot of people in EQ. You do a lot of EQ training. To the person that doesn't fully understand what EQ is, how would you explain it at its most basic?
Yeah. So the big differentiator between EQ and IQ, you can have people who have a very high IQ, who are excellent at various subject matters, like let's take maths or actuarial science, for instance, but would have a very low EQ. EQ is about the ability to manage yourself and your emotions, but that's only part of the equation. So you could have people with a very high IQ understand themselves and have real insight into themselves, but not be able to manage it. So understanding yourself and your emotions is one aspect of the equation. In fact, I would say it's a third of the equation. The other part to it is being able to act on it, your own emotions. But then the last part is the most important. And that is, if you want to forge a relationship and if you want to be successful in your relationships with people, then understanding others and being able to act on that too. So not being reactive, having empathy for others. People don't get up in the morning thinking, how can I most irritate Dylan today? If they do something that offends you, it's 9 times out of 10 not deliberate. So having empathy for where that person comes from, you have no idea what that person has had to do and how they've had to hustle to get to work on that particular day. And then if they suddenly lash out and have a very negative response, to have empathy and go, okay, I understand, you're probably having a really bad day, and not react from our own perspective and take it personally. So not taking things personally, having empathy for the other, managing your own emotions, and being able to respond to others in a positive way. That kind of is EQ in a nutshell.
That's beautiful, and I think very important to learn as early as possible in our careers as well. Especially, again, in the context of feeling the challenge of all these opinions and everything that's around us, particularly from social media, especially for Gen Z and young generations. Yeah.
And also forgive yourself if you've done something that went a little bit pear. There's no reason why you can't repair that with the person on the other side. People are incredibly forgiving of if you ask for forgiveness. It's amazing. We are all hardwired to have connection and to want to be connected to people. And if somebody is genuinely contrite and if you ask for forgiveness, it's amazing how quickly people do forgive. So I try to live by the maxim, the next words that come out of my mouth, will they enhance the relationship or will they break the relationship down? So if I say what I am about to say, is it going to improve the relationship, particularly in the workplace, or will it actually harm our relationship? Because at the end of the day, you spend 80% of your time at work. You might as well get on with people.
Definitely. And dealing with all types of personalities and all types of people is one of the key skills, especially because so much of the work we do is in teams. It's not one-on-one as much.
Yes.
Especially when you're starting out your career, maybe later on if you're doing consulting, it might be in small environments, but for the most part we're working in teams and with other people. So those are really key skills to learn early on. And Marleen, just to kind of build on that a little bit, it's all about these relationships that we have with people. How would you define? Obviously, we have our personal relationships in our day-to-day life, but how would you define a professional relationship? What's the difference that comes up in a professional relationship, and what do we have to do to maintain that to the best of our ability?
That's quite a hard question, because there's a piece that says we have to be authentic and show up as our real selves, but that doesn't mean letting everything hang out. It also means leaving certain things at the door. So perhaps there are certain cultural responses that we might have which are different to the culture of the organization, and to literally be mindful of that and to read the room. If there is a certain way in which I interact with somebody. So let me give you an example, like real practical example. I'm German speaking and I'm also a lawyer. And I tend to be quite blunt. And I've had to soften that. One of my coaches said I had to wear more pink. And I don't even do pink. I don't see pink as a color. But I understand that my bluntness is offensive to certain people and can be offensive. And because you don't want to offend people on a day-to-day basis, to soften your tone and your approach and not be that blunt on a day-to-day basis is incredibly important. So that's one example. In the workplace, being professional also relates to respect. And it's not about demanding respect and commanding respect, but it's about respecting others and showing up in a way that you humble and listen, but are respectful at all times. And it's actually not rocket science. So you might behave in a certain way at home that would be absolutely unacceptable in the workplace. So, for instance, dress code. Many organizations have a certain dress code, and that's completely okay if you're client facing. And to read the room and understand that and respect that about the organization, and say, well, at home I might show up like this, but actually in the workplace I will be a little bit more respectful to my environment. Literally just reading the room and being mindful of what the norms and values are within the organization. That's kind of the acceptable practice for everyone in the organization. And if you don't know, ask.
And Marleen, to the person who feels that they're struggling with the kind of culture of the organization or the rules, so to speak, especially the young person, how could you help them to kind of ease that passage instead of feeling the need to either leave or to kind of rebel? Is there like a middle ground that could be found there?
I think survival in an organization is about reading the room. And I've used that expression before. And if I think of myself as a young person in an organization, I joined the first organization that I worked for was completely alien to how I might have acted, a completely different culture to how I grew up. And I honestly, literally, to use a very quaint expression, minded my P's and Q's and sat around and waited and watched and looked to see how people interacted with each other. If there is a mentor in the organization, that's a really good person to ask that question. And sometimes there are people in organizations that lend themselves to mentoring and coaching and that are more approachable than others. Go and ask that person if there's something that you literally don't understand. I don't understand why these people do X, Y, Z. Then to ask and find out. So there's a very good book that I often give people that I coach, and it's called How to Win at Office Politics. And I can't even remember the author, but it is one of the best books that I've read about this topic, where when you join an organization and you're more junior, for want of a better word, you have to try and fit in with the corporate culture. It's political to do that. It might not be kind of your bent. You might be rebellious in your personality. It might not be your bent to be that political. But honestly, if you want to get ahead, stick around, watch, listen, wait, speak to people, ask. And if something's really alien to you, then go to that one person who's approachable and say, something happened yesterday which I really don't understand. Can you just, throw some light on it? But as people who've entered an organization, unfortunately, to a certain extent, you do have to play a political game for a while. So one of the things that I often coach people on is there are some people who are really difficult to get on with. Ask people around, how does one get on with that particular person? And, the advice will be, well, don't approach them when they first come in the morning. Wait until they've calmed down and had their coffee and, only approach them at 10 o'clock. And everyone is different. And listen and wait and see and play that game, because it's a career limiting move to be rebellious right up front. Wait until you've been elevated to your next level before you start rebelling against organizational culture. That's just my advice.
Yeah, and I think that's a very interesting thing, because again, in our schooling system and our education system, the political element of the workplace is often not taught. We learn about the hard skills often, but the softer if we can call them softer skills, or the ability to navigate those dynamics are often not taught, and we have to learn that. And that's where mentorship is, like you mentioned, is so key, right? Someone that's walked the journey that can support.
And there's literally always somebody who's approachable. And if you never be scared of asking those sorts of questions. So in some companies, they have slogans like, we have courageous conversations. I call them necessary conversations. So if there's something that you really don't understand, ask somebody. If you ask it with a genuine intention of finding out, nobody's going to be offended by a question. And if somebody has done something to you that you find difficult or don't understand, then always speak from the me mode and say, I found that quite difficult. Help me understand. I'd like to understand better. Like, where did that come from? Did I misread it? I'm genuinely asking in order to gain an understanding. Nobody takes offense at that. It's when we point a finger and go, you always or you never, which are always platitudes. They're terrible, because it's not true that you always or you never. It happened yesterday and it was one incident. So we have to be careful about those generalizations. But if we speak from the me mode with a genuine intent of wanting to have more information, it would, if that person then takes it personally, then that's their stuff, not yours.
Yeah, that's a very powerful way of approaching it, Marleen. I'd like to just reflect then on your own journey as in closing. What advice would you give to your younger self when you were just beginning out starting out your adulting journey or your career? What would you like to tell the younger Marleen in her early 20s?
If you are job hunting rather than job shopping, then that becomes a lot more difficult. And we are, unfortunately, in the climate in South Africa where we have to job hunt. If you get a job, you're lucky. Then it literally means you're waiting around and doing that kind of watch and see and navigating the political, arena of that particular organization. If you are lucky enough to job shop, what I mean by that is finding an organization that aligns with where you want to be and what you want to do, then that's a much easier journey. And that is really about right from the get-go, understanding who you are, what your values are. And if you land on 2 values that define you, not more than that, then that is already a massive indicator of where you should be and what kind of organization you should be joining. And then that makes that choice and that decision making a lot easier. Our values do change. So as a young mother, my value was definitely centered around bringing my children up and making good people out of my children. But when my children left home, then I could focus again on myself and really craft and hone my own values and see whether what I was doing was aligned with that. But when you're first starting out, and if you're lucky enough to contemplate this in your early 20s, that would be my strongest advice. Literally think about where, if you were to sit with your best friend on a stoop at the age of 80, having a glass of champagne or whatever it is that's your poison, and look back and reflect on your life. What would you have wanted to achieve? And what would you have wanted to feel gratified that you pursued at that particular point? And that's not a bad way of looking at it. And then breaking down, your life over the next year or the next 5 years and the next 10 years and going, how do I achieve that particular image that I had in my mind?
That's a really beautiful prompt or way of thinking about our values and what it is we stand for, and that zooming out of the whole of life is a very powerful approach. But Marleen, I want to thank you for your time. I think there are such incredible insights which you have and you live by and you share regularly, and there's so much of it is about knowing yourself and understanding who you are and what you stand for and your values, and the ability then to interact with people and to navigate difficult relationships and the workplace dynamics and sometimes playing the game to an extent, But I think you're an expert in helping people to navigate that landscape. So I want to just say thank you to you for making the time on our
Thank you,
podcast today.
Dylan. Also, just want to say you don't have to know all the answers. It's a lifelong journey which you can craft as you go along, but having a basic understanding is a good start. Thank you, Dylan. I appreciate your time.